Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 386 featuring Sean Devereaux, producer and visual effects supervisor. Someone, dude, I've known for many years. I work with him back at DD, as do a lot of my stories tend to be. But he is a very successful person in the field of visual effects. He started his own company called Zero VFX, and he actually has sold of Zero VFX, but the company's still very much alive. He just sold his shares. But he something else he did is while he was at Zero, he spun off another company called Zync, which some of you may know because it was sold. He sold it to Google, and Zync is obviously a cloud rendering system that Google purchased from him. So he's actually been really involved in the industry, and it's been really cool to work to catch up with him and have him back onto the podcast. So really exciting to have Sean. Kristen, what did you think of Sean?
Well, it's an exciting podcast because he talks very excited, and you just want to listen the whole time. So he kind of just takes us through his journey, just literally hustling his way into Hollywood, and to owning his own VFX studio, like you said, and now he's just producing and VFX supervising. I also liked how he said in the beginning, he just really wanted to love his job, and then his story of how he got a job at DD. It's quite fun to hear, so I'll let you listen to that. Right. And also he kind of talks about how it was working at the beginning of COVID, working on movies and just all the different precautions that they had to take. Yeah. And I like leaving with this quote that he said. He said, if you're not making mistakes, you're not working hard enough. Because as he said, making movies is hard, but the reward is worth it. And, the harder you work, some mistakes happen, but they're good mistakes usually in the end. Yeah. He's basically don't be cautious is what he's is really kind of saying, but it's great. I mean, Sean is fantastic. He's full of energy, as you said. Really love talking to him. He's a super nice guy. He really knows his stuff. He's got a sharp eye and he says what he means. So it's really cool talking to him about that kind of stuff. Cool. We have a couple of announcements. First thing is we should say that V-Ray 6 for 3ds Max is out. I know you'll be asking for when is it going to be out for other products? Betas are starting to roll out for our other other platforms. So don't worry, Max and Maya and Houdini and SketchUp, Rhino, all of those will eventually get their V-Ray 6s, and they will be fairly soon. So, but if you're interested in V-Ray 6, go check it out. Go to chaos.com. Lots of new features, including a new procedural cloud system, geometric pattern tools, scatter tools, decals with displacement, or displacement for decals, and proxy objects hierarchy. So lots and lots of other, and much, much more. So go check it out at chaos.com. All right, we have an event coming up, which we've mentioned a little bit before, but it's going to be happening again. Tell us, Kristen, what is happening in September? All right, so you can find this out at chaos.com/events, and it is 24 Hours of Chaos. It is back September 8th and 9th. Just a quick rundown. It is 24 hours, and it's a series of 12 back-to-back shows, all online, and we unite 3D artists, designers, all around the world working in arc viz, VFX, animation, gaming, and product design. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Our show is the LA show, which will be on September 8th at 6 p.m. PST time. So tune into that. But go to chaos.com/24-hours.chaos to find out more, or just go to our events page.
I love 24 Hours of Chaos. I thought at first, it was like, this is crazy. We're not really going to do this. And then it turns out it was absolutely amazing. There are several people who actually stay up for all 24 hours and watch all 12 shows. So it's a cool and a commitment. I just have it on and playing the whole time while I'm working, which is great. And it's really cool. All right, cool. People want to know more about the podcast, Kristen. Where can they go?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you'd like to watch us, go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV.
Perfect. And if you guys have any comments or questions or ideas for other guests on the podcast, please let us know. Email is labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 386 with Sean Devereaux.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passe. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Well, how are you?
I'm good, man. It's been a crazy couple of years, like it has for everyone.
Yeah.
But doing really good. How about you?
I'm doing the same. Actually, working from home has worked out pretty well for me. I don't have to do 2.5 hours of driving to get to work. And so it's saved me a lot. And I've always kind of slightly been an army of one in what I do. So I just brought everything here at the house. And I got a Vive in a living room, so I can do my stuff. So it's been good.
That's awesome.
It's been good. Yeah. Good. Well, cool. Listen, obviously you and I know each other for years and stuff, but I want to give people a bit of a background into what you do and how you got to be doing the kind of things you do. So give us and by the way, what I like the most about this podcast is people that I've known for years. I found out all kinds of cool stuff about them that I didn't even know. So what's your origin story, Sean?
Oh man, the origin story. Wow. Okay. So I guess I knew. I'll start way back. I'll do it quickly. I knew when I was 4 years old I wanted to do movies, and I think visual effects in particular. Although I didn't know what that was at 4 years old, obviously.
Right.
I watched Wizard of Oz on my parents' 13-inch color TV. Hid behind their couch when the Wicked Witch of the West, burned up into a fireball, and went through the floor. And to this day, I've never had an emotion as strong as the fear I felt.
Right.
In that moment, and kind of in hindsight, I think my next film was, okay, how did they do that to me and how do I do it to other people? Not necessarily the fear of it, but how does this small little box affect me so viscerally? So that was kind of what I wanted to do from that point on, and then spent the next, 18 years talking myself out of it because I didn't know anyone. I came, I was born in just outside of Boston. Didn't know a single person that had ever been on a movie set, let alone worked on a movie or anything like that. So I just didn't think it was realistic. And I come from a very... both my parents are super hard workers. We never really had any money. My dad worked 2 jobs to support us. So I didn't see him much. So all I knew was you have to work really hard. And that's the goal, support your family. And movies was not something that just kind of thought that was possible. I didn't have a single example. And even more than that, I didn't have an example of really an adult in my life that loved what they did. Like my dad worked his ass off, like unbelievable work ethic, great example. But for 35 years, worked at the same place and never once told me a part of it he liked. So it was like I had an example of work hard, don't worry about having fun. You're supposed to work hard. So all I knew as a kid was I don't want to be an adult ever. Like that sounds horrible. But that's how I made my decision. So like I wanted to do movies, but I went and studied graphic design because I knew I could go design logos for small businesses. I had a natural talent to it, and it's not a hard job to get.
Right.
And because of I think it's divine intervention, whatever the reason is. I finished my graphic design degree. It was supposed to be a 4-year program. I finished it in 3 semesters because I had some problems with the registrations. And anyway, I finished it. So I'm like, wait, I have 2.5 years left of gen eds. Oh, that's awful.
Right.
So I took one film class where we got to roll 1 can of 8mm reversal stock, edit in camera, spent it out, came back 2 weeks later, got to project it, and jumped up and down, was screaming so loud at what I was watching that professors from around the school had to come tell me to shut up. And I knew that this is what I have to do the rest of my life. And I went to a school, I'll just say it because, maybe I went to a school called Fitchburg State University, a really small school, central Massachusetts. At the time, like as a freshman, we were cutting on Avids, which was, that didn't happen.
What year was this?
This was in 1990. I graduated in 99, so it would have been 96 when I started.
Okay. Avids are expensive systems back then.
Well, Avid is from Tewksbury, Massachusetts, so there was a direct local connection.
Nice. That's cool.
So that was huge, and honestly, to be able to have access to computers. And then, of course, we had After Effects,
right?
But no one knew how to use it, so I did some self-studies on how to do that. And then my graphic design kind of prowess leaned very easily into visual effects and turned into motion. I became the visual effects guy at school for all the short films and did everything from exploding heads to title design and all the things we get to do. So it was super fun. And then Jonathan Egstad is an alumni of my school.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I had, and Digital Domain, it's so weird, man.
People should know who Jonathan Egstad. He was like one of the big nuke guys at DD. Like he kind of wrote a big portion of it, right?
Yeah, he wrote, I think, if not, a big portion of it. And he's currently rewriting it right now. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I know he's at the Foundry again now, working on it again, which is great. So he was so I didn't know who he was. I didn't know he went to school. I had no knowledge of him. And at Fitchburg State University, you're required to do your last semester in the communications department, whether you're in photography or graphic design or film, you have to do a internship, unpaid. Mm-hmm. And for reasons that I won't get into because it's too long, Digital Domain was the only place I wanted to work. Mm-hmm. They had just won the Academy Award for Titanic. They were nominated at the time for What Dreams May Come, I believe, or they were about to be. For whatever reason, I wanted to go there. Didn't know anyone there. And a week before my internship deadline, where the school was literally saying, you either find a spot in LA now, or you're staying in Boston, you're going to go work at a public access channel or something that has nothing to do with what I want to be doing. And I'm starting to panic. I went through HR at DD, tried everything. They did not have a priority of hiring an intern. Right. That was not something that they were looking to do. And just randomly walking around the school, the camera equipment guy, manager of that department, who kind of, when you checked out cameras, you talked to him, heard me complaining or walking through the hallway saying, and he goes, "Well, did you call Jonathan Egstad yet?" And I was like, "Who's Jonathan Egstad?" And I'm like, he'd only graduated, I think, 7 years before me or 6 years before me. It wasn't like a crazy long time, but everyone knew what I wanted to do, and none of the other professors mentioned that there was an alumni that worked at the company
you wanted to work
that I wanted to be at. So I called Jonathan. I sent him my very shoddy but highly polished, VHS demo reel with cover art for my graphic design program, and said, "Please let me come work for you for free." And literally a day before the deadline, he just said, "Yeah, come on down." And I was like, "Oh my goodness!" And a week later, it was right before the Christmas break, and a week later, I was driving to California with everything I owned, which was a desk, a crappy computer I owed money on, and $500 in cash, and a Hyundai Accent with no car radio.
Did you have air conditioning?
Which was a rough drive. I did have air conditioning.
Okay, good.
So that worked out, but it was January, so I don't think that came up.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Okay, so how long was your internship supposed to be?
So it was the spring semester, so January through, was that April-ish?
Okay.
Give or take. And dude, my first day at Digital Domain, I'm sitting, Jonathan Egstad's on my right, Lupa Core is on my left, Mike Canfer is diagonal to me. And the first person I have lunch with is Mike Canfer, just randomly in the kitchen. Right. And color scientist genius. Right. And I'm just like, and then Mark Stetson was my first supervisor. Oh, wow. We were doing Supernova. Yep. Just the surroundings I got to be in, it's still one of the, I just can't believe it. Like the way my career got to start, the leadership I was around, the generosity of all these people, the gratitude these people feel that I also feel, like I can never replace those first couple years of DD. Yeah. And as an intern, to be the first day, literally sitting next to 2 Academy Award winners. I think Lou's now been nominated. If not, he will be soon. Right. Like, it was just crazy. And Mark Stetson, of course, multiple nominations.
I've actually tried to get Mark Stetson to be on this podcast a couple times. I don't know why I keep not being able to connect with him, but he's such a nice person. He's so great. Such a nice.
Oh my gosh, dude. Like, the fact he knew my name. Like, he was literally finishing Supernova, which is a horrible movie, but gorgeous visual effects. They were working 7 days a week. A new intern showing up halfway through. Like, how often do you give that person the time of day? You just don't have the time to. I mean, we were walking down hallways together, or he's getting to know me. I'm like, dude, and at the time, it was my first experience in this business, so I didn't understand that was how rare that was. Right. It's like, how are you, looking back on it, especially now as a supervisor, how are you working 7 days a week, driving 300 people to finish a movie that you have no time to do, and you're spending time talking to an intern and getting to know them? Like, holy cow, man. Like, the generosity and gratitude in that was just, it's unbelievable. The example they
Are you paying it forward now?
Oh, as much as I possibly can, without question. I mean, it's, the heart for this is not softened for me. I feel like I said, I don't want to ever be adult. I feel like I'm still not yet an adult. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's like you feel like you're playing a lot when you do some of that stuff. So that was great. All right, so you got your internship there. You got there through May, and then did that suddenly turn into a real position?
Yeah, I will tell this story real quick because, I'm getting too long into this stuff, but I think it's worth telling. So Lisa Spence was the production manager, I believe, on Supernova, or at least coordinator somewhere on there. She was amazing, of course, and is amazing. It was, I think, the second weekend I was there. Everyone was working 7 days a week. Obviously, they were not requiring me to do anything but 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 and no weekends. But if they were there, I was there. I wanted to be the first one in and the last one to leave. Right. And on a couple nights, they were like, you need to leave now. This is not okay. And then I just refused to do it. So they were like, fine, if you're going to stay here, you're going to sit next to Kerry Villegas and make sure he saves every 20 minutes. So literally there was nights where I just sit there, watch Kerry Villegas on the flame, make sure he's saving every 20 minutes, while we're both kind of nodding our heads every time there's a render happening. But anyway, one Sunday, it was the second Sunday I was there. The kitchen was destroyed because obviously lunch is getting brought in every day.
Right.
The cleaning staff isn't coming in on Sundays, so it was destroyed. So I cleaned the kitchen without being asked to do it. And again, I thought it was a work ethic thing. I realize now it's like, no, I just loved being there so much. I needed to just keep contributing in any way I could. But anyway, Lisa comes in and catches me cleaning the kitchen, and she's like, who told you to do this? And I'm like, nobody. You guys deserve a clean place to eat. And without any, like, I wasn't just genuine. Like, you guys deserve a clean place to eat. You're freaking here 7 days a week.
Right.
And she's like, well, what are you doing after your internship? And I'm like, I don't know. She's like, you're hired. So she hired me 2 weeks in because I cleaned the kitchen well.
Well, no, you saw value in it. I mean, I think that's awesome. And Lisa is an amazing person.
Amazing.
I had the hardest. I was my first position as a lead was on iRobot, and she was the manager on that, and I was having a hard time with certain parts of it, the leadership part, because the leadership part is the hard part. Being a good artist is one thing, but being a good leader is actually a completely new set of challenges.
Totally different.
And I was having a hard part with that, and she just talked me through it and guided me through it and making tough decisions and having difficult conversations. And I was like, oh my God, she was amazing. So I absolutely, incredible person. Yeah.
And not grabbing the mouse every time someone has a problem.
Yes. Don't grab the mouse when someone has a problem. Exactly right thing to say.
That took some time.
Yeah.
That took some time to learn that one.
Yeah, because you did Flame too, right?
I did Flame and Nuke. That was my specialty.
Yeah, because Flame artists tend to like to grab the mouse.
I mean, again, I was just so blessed to be surrounded by the people I was, like Klaus Hanke, and Donovan Scott, Brian Grill, Matthew Butler. Like, the examples of leadership I had, like from the start of my career, was ridiculous. Yeah, and it's like you look up this last Academy Awards, it's like 75% of the people nominated for Best Visual Effects, they were all digital. I was like, this is what a blessing to be around that group at the time.
And
it's
Kelly and all those guys.
Nikos
and Paul Lambert.
Swen. It's like ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Yep. All right. So your first film as an intern was Supernova, and then what did you go on from there?
So from there, I joined the technical assistant or technical department at Digital Domain, basically the internal customer support. And, had a box of stuff with like extra styluses and mice and things like that. And they'd call the hotline and I'd run over into the other multiple buildings and fix people's computers as quickly as I could.
Okay.
And just to, again, because I'm sure people that are starting in the industry are listening, like one thing, every time I met someone, they knew immediately my name and that I wanted to be an artist.
Right.
I wasn't shy about it. I was very humble about it too. I was like, I am an artist. Give me a chance. It was like, I'm trying to be an artist. Anything you can, let me know, teach me would be great. Yep. But I did my day job first and foremost. I hustled, got the computer problem fixed, and while I'm fixing it, I would kind of try to break the news that I'm an artist.
I knew a lot of PhDs who worked at their first job at ILM in the tape room doing backups.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I mean, it's like, that's. Luckily, I did not have. I barely got a bachelor's degree. Okay, I did get it, but barely. Yeah. But like it started like so. Klaus Hanke, just another example of great leadership. Like he called me once on the hotline, ran over to the system, had my box of stuff to fix anything he needs. I'm like, all right, what do you need? What's going on, Klaus? How can I fix you? And he goes, no, sit down. You bring your notebook. I'm like, yeah, I have a notebook. He's like, all right, I'm going to teach you about logarithmic color space.
Oh.
And I was like, what? Like you didn't need anything? You're actually teaching me? Mm-hmm. So again, just the generosity of that leadership is something I still try to do today, and it was a huge blessing. So from there, I went on to, I think my first movie as an artist was The Grinch Who Stole Christmas.
Oh, right.
Matthew Butler brought me in. I was supposed to be a roto artist, but they brought me in to do the 3D system in Nuke and just basically assemble all the pan and tiles for the Skywork. And this was like barely, at this point, there was not a visual interface for the 3D system for Nuke.
Right.
It was just command line. So if the math worked, we saw the sky through the camera. And if the math didn't work, I saw a black screen. Right. So I literally got to learn the Nuke 3D system, not by pressing buttons and trying stuff, but literally having to do the math, which was a huge blessing as far as understanding how things work. Especially someone that I'm not really a math guy necessarily at that level. Mm-hmm. But to have to lean on math was a huge, blessing at that point because I couldn't hack it. I had to do it right.
Right.
So that was a really great experience. And then after that, we went right from Grinch to Vanilla Sky, which is another huge sky show for obvious reasons. Yep. And basically, I got to help teach the 25 compositors that were on how to use the 3D system in Nuke, and basically led that show through, which was amazing. And for Matthew Butler on that one. And then just started compositing, and then quickly went to comp souping. Because I think I was one of the first people to know the 3D system in Nuke, except for Jonathan Egstad. So it was a nice thing. Or 3D artists. Like Matthew Butler knew it really well, of course, but he was busy doing other things.
Sure.
And then, I spent, I think 4 or 5 years at DD, where I eventually burnt myself out. Despite everyone warning me, I would burn myself out because I was working 80 hours a week because I loved it so much. And then at some point, you stop loving it because you're insane. And if you don't, and it was just not their fault, it was my fault. It was actually on the time I met you on iRobot is when I started getting burnt out. Unfortunately, you didn't meet me at my best, unfortunately.
Well, everyone has their up shows and down shows for sure.
But at that point it was, again, I had great leaders there with my managers there and stuff, and it was just time to leave. So I took a break from DD. And what did I do first after that? I mean, after that, I was a little of a journeyman. I did ILM for Transformers, which was tremendous. What a great experience. I moved to New York City for a year, worked at some of the smaller visual effects houses there at the time. There really weren't any big visual effects houses in New York at the time, but had great experiences doing flame for commercials and things like that. And then went back to LA and did a little more journeyman stuff. And then eventually my wife got pregnant with our first baby. We're both from Massachusetts, and she said she wanted to go back to Massachusetts.
Okay.
And I said, but I make movies. So
there are a couple of places in Massachusetts that do some stuff.
Yeah, but it wasn't really feature level. There wasn't at that point anything really. The tax credit had just kind of started. So there was one company, Brickyard VFX, that was doing a movie of The Proposal and Surrogates for Disney. And I called the LA office, David Blumenfeld, who DD guy, and was like, hey, just randomly, I'm thinking of moving to Boston. Can you connect me with someone in the Boston office? And he was like, yes, they need people. And I called Brian Drews, who was one of the owners of Brickyard Filmworks, and he said, can you start tomorrow, basically? And I did. I went and supervised The Proposal just in post, and Surrogates in post only. And got to move to Boston, got to do what I love. And that was actually my first supervisor credit, too. So the move to Boston actually promoted me as well, which is kind of fun.
Nice.
And kind of helped to build that company. But then unfortunately, just due to the lack of film work, there wasn't that much, especially post work in Boston. We didn't get to keep that train going. So the company closed, or that section of it. I don't know if it closed. I was laid off anyway. The contract was ended. And then it was like, okay, great. And then ILM said they wanted me for Iron Man 2. And I was like, great, we're going back to San Francisco. At that point, we had a baby, of course, that was been born. And my wife's like, no, I want to stay here. And I'm like, but no, I want to go to do Iron Man 2. Iron Man was amazing. Right. And I loved ILM. ILM is one of my favorite places I've ever worked. And there was a 15 shots for Kevin James movie called Zookeeper, which was kind of floating out before Brickyard had closed. And then, or before I was let go, and then, or I don't know how you want to say that. Right. I'm just trying to be carefully legally speaking, because I'm not sure if they actually closed. No one worked there anymore. I can say that. Anyway, so I said, look, if we get a bid package for Zookeeper, then we can start a company like in our basement, and it's fine. But they have till Friday for the deadline. Right. And if they don't do it, then we get to go to San Francisco, which is what I was really pulling for. And like literally an hour before the ILM had given me a deadline of when I have to answer by, we got the bid package. Small amount of work, 13 to 15 shots, not a big award, but we could start a company in our basement. So we started with like literally $500 worth of used IKEA furniture. And we started working on Zookeeper. I hired some freelancers I'd worked with previously at Brickyard. Right. And we were off and running. And from there, we moved out of my basement 6 months later, started a commercial division. There's a lot of big agencies in Boston, so we got some commercial work pretty quickly. Features took 2 to 3 years to kind of get going. Yeah. But then we got to do American Hustle with David O. Russell, which was kind of our first mini break. And then our first real break was Antoine Fuqua gave us a break on the Equalizer. Right. With Denzel Washington. So that once that happened, we were off and running.
And that was Zero. That's the start of Zero.
That was the start of Zero Visual Effects. And then also kind of a side note from there, and again, tell me to shorten this up if you need to.
No, you're doing fine.
But we didn't have any money. Right. Like I'm very opposed to debt. I moved to Massachusetts with a tremendous amount of debt. Before I had even left Brickyard, I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like having a creative role and having to choose projects based on how much money you can get in the door to make sure you keep paying your bills felt like an awful way to keep living my life. Right. So right before we started Zero, I paid off all my debt. Right. So the great thing was I had no debt, but I had no money. Like either there was no savings because we used it all to pay off all the debt. Like we sold a car, I was taking the bus to work. Like we had nothing,
right?
But we had no debt. So it was great, and that's why I was able to start the company. Because honestly, if I still had debt, I would have had to go back to San Francisco and do Ironman, just because there would have been no choice. I need to keep paying those debt bills.
Right.
So now that we had no debt, I wasn't about to go into debt. But as you know, a visual effects company, we need a lot of computers, especially for rendering.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I was not interested in signing a mortgage for computers that even at our peak wouldn't be enough, and most of the time would be too much.
Right.
So it felt like a bad idea. Amazon, the AWS had started spinning up for websites now, so we're like, let's see if we can do this. And we were mostly a 2D house. That's my obviously skill set. Nuke was our big thing. But so the I/O using the internet to render was like, even the first time Brian Drews, my business partner, mentioned me, I was like, that's insane. How are we going to upload everything, render it, and download it? It's a 30-second frame per frame render on most Nuke jobs, and it's a 25-minute per frame upload. Like, that's ridiculous. We can't do that.
Right.
So then he was like, okay, great. Then we have to go get a loan for $750,000 to buy machines. And I said, that sucks.
Yeah.
No way we're doing that.
Right.
So I said, well, let's spend some time. So we spent like a week, literally. And one of the first people we had hired was Brian Cipriano, a software engineer on our team, which was the great decision we made. Rather than just staffing with artists to get the work done, we're like, we got to do this smart. So we brought on Brian very early on. And we're like, let's just see if we can render Nuke on the cloud. Mm-hmm. And then as we did that, and it took him, I think, less than 24 hours to actually get the first render up.
Now, what year was this? I want to just put this in perspective for people.
This is 2000. We started the company in 2010, so we were already doing this in 2010. We started pretty much right away on this rendering software. So as he was doing it, those 24 hours, like back and forth, like how do we even just get a job spun up and get the software installed and do all the things?
Yeah.
We were just talking about how could we architect this? And like, well, what if it uploaded in the background, so the artist doesn't need to know that there's an upload even happening, really?
Right.
Like for me, it was like I don't want the artist to be slowed down with waiting for his job to upload. So what if we're going to do this, I want it to be as transparent to the audience as possible. I want it to feel like the server room is next door and they're just kicking off renders.
Right.
So again, part of the first test, although the first one was just getting the job off, the second test after that was like, can we just have a upload only job, render job? Can we just press a button in Nuke? You basically take in your reads. Once all the images are read into Nuke, you press one button, it kicks off a render job that all it's doing is uploading the files.
Right.
So that worked really quickly. Within a week, we had our first kind of real render that was already uploaded. We could render in seconds and download right to the directory we were writing to. So there was no like, okay, upload, okay, then wait for the render, then check the render, then put it in the wrong folder, and then move it and rename it. It really felt like you were doing it right locally.
Right.
So that was called Zync, Z-Y-N-C. Mm-hmm. And we continued to develop that over time. We had great partners, Kevin Bailey and Atomic Fiction, came on board as our very, very, very first customers, and were really paramount to the beta rounds of it and even the alpha rounds.
Yep.
And then we sold that tech to Google in 2014.
Yep.
So we got to sell just that piece of it. So Zero was still ours, but Zync went away, and Brian Cipriano went away, and some of our Zync team had to go and work for Google, which they still do this day, which I'm really excited about because they're loving it.
Because we actually got a part of, we got V-Ray working in Zync for Atomic Fiction at that time. So that was the big.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, V-Ray was the first. I didn't even realize you were there.
Yeah, we were the first renderer, the first 3D renderer to work in Zync.
Yeah, and the easiest people to work with, by the way, too. Everyone else we had to work with was a real pain in the butt. I'm not going to lie. It was on the 3D side. It was like the licensing issues and all the things. And you guys were awesome.
Yeah. No. Okay. So, but let's think about the economics back in 2010. Yeah. Like, $750,000 to create your own render farm that you didn't want to, that's going to depreciate by the second, right? Or do it on the cloud. Now, the cloud wasn't as cheap as it is now, or it's getting cheaper now. Like, what was the cost? Like, how did you figure out that cost?
So for us, I mean, over time, like if you looked at it and you could say over the course of a year, if we know exactly how much work we're going to have, then ultimately buying the machines would have been cheaper.
Right.
However, especially a brand new company, we had no track record. We had no ability to know how much work we're going to get in. We had no ability how much rendering we're going to need to do.
Right.
What we did know was the $750,000 worth of machines were not going to be enough when we were at our busiest.
Right.
And we're going to be way too much on most days. So it felt like a really bad way to do it at all. And then with Zync, even though, yes, per render hour, it's a bit of an upcharge. Mm-hmm. It was billed to the project. There was no hidden costs. We knew as we were going what the costs were going to be, and there was no big risk of like, holy cow, we spent $70,000 on rendering. It was like nominal. So we'd spend, say, I think we spent like $35,000 rendering on American Hustle, which had 500 shots. It was not a big expense when you consider if we had bought the $750,000 worth of machines, and yes, maybe things would have rendered a little quicker.
Right.
You know, it's like we spent $35,000 all in versus we still have a mortgage on $750,000 and the movie's done and we're not getting paid anymore. And we still got to pay these machines that aren't doing anything.
Yeah.
So you're right, economically, once you have a track record, at that point in time, it would have been wiser to get the money, get the loan. You'll make a little more money, a little more profit long term. But honestly, too, to this day, because I haven't done enough, it's been so long, I don't know the full assessment.
Right.
By the time those machines are paid for, you have to buy new ones.
Yeah.
So I don't honestly know that Zync would have been more expensive because Amazon was constantly upgrading machines.
Yeah.
Like it felt like every quarter they were like, hey, guess what? Now we have 16 cores. We're like, holy shit.
Right.
And we have 96 gigabytes of RAM. Holy shit.
Right.
This is great.
Right.
So it kept getting better and better.
Yep.
Which was a huge deal.
The way I sort of say it is like, you know, you can scale up real fast, but you can also scale down real fast, right?
Exactly. Well, instantaneously.
When you're not rendering, you're
literally
not paying.
instantaneously.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, it really saved our butt. There was a night we were, while we were at Zero, I'm a huge Boston Red Sox fan, as you can kind of tell from the things behind me.
Right.
And they had just installed HD screens at Fenway Park before the season started. And I'm like, you guys have to introduce these really cool. So I went and approached the Red Sox, like, let us do this for you. I want to basically have the screens explode. Like, look, when you walk into the stadium that day, I want it to look like the old screens. So, like, literally the old crappy manual analog light bulbs, really bad video screen. So that the crowd comes in and goes, what? I thought they were upgrading these. What? This is weird. Like, why are they all boring? And so we did that. And the New York Yankees, obviously the rival, they got introduced in this old version. Like, we were with the control room. We created a font for them. So it literally looked like it was the old thing. Like, no upgrade at all. Like, it had, like, bad bulb works were out. There was dents on it from, like, the baseballs. And the New York Yankees get introduced on that. And then the mayor of Boston comes out, the ownership of the Red Sox, and they have a fake button. They said, all right, press the button. And then the screens explode all around the stadium, breaking the old one, and then the new ones come up in HD. And it was so much fun.
Oh, my God.
To be a part of that. It was really cool. And then the Red Sox get announced on the big HD, and you're like, holy cow, what a difference.
Right.
But the fun thing was the night before opening day, where they were in the control box at Fenway Park, showing it to the owners at midnight, and we're rendering one last version back at the office. So we're still going to do one more version, but we had to get them to approve it. And we get a call from the office. Yeah, you guys have to come back right now because there's water pouring down on our office, like everywhere. So I stayed with the Red Sox to kind of get their notes. Brian ran back to the office and sent me video. There's literally water pouring out of the ceiling everywhere. On our computers, on the server, I mean, everywhere. It was a total disaster. There was a hair salon above us.
Okay.
Who one of their pipes had burst and just flooded. They had like 3 feet of water that just started finally pouring down into our place. Fire department came, everything. Anyway, so we had no computers now. Our server was washed. We were hoping it would turn on again the next day when it was dry. But the best thing was because we had done Zync, although it was early days, everything was on the cloud.
Right.
So
it's like automatic backup.
Exactly. So it was a huge benefit. We were able to deliver the Red Sox stuff, and we were working on a feature at the time. That all got done.
Yeah.
So then it became like, well, shit. Like, I mean, this is way better than having our own server because we would have been totally done.
Right.
If that server didn't turn on again, we had some LTOs from a couple of days before, but we would have lost the last 3 days of this Red Sox project, which honestly, we wouldn't have been able to get it done. I mean, you can't do 3 days of work in 6 hours, you know?
Right. So there was huge benefits to that. So when you sold Zync, did Google approach you guys like, hey, we want a solution, we want to be part of this, you guys have something that we could use, or did you guys how did that sort of work?
So it wasn't. We had been approached by other people, not Google.
Okay.
And Google had offered us a small fee, well, what we consider a small fee to move it from AWS to the Google Cloud Services.
Right.
Which at the time we were like, yeah, it would basically cost us exactly the number you're giving us.
Right.
And they even offered discounts on, the CPUs. And they're like, yeah, I don't think it's going to, like, there's going to be something bigger than that.
Sure.
And that was like a year before we sold it. And then as we were continuing to run, at this point now, our feature film business was really starting to go. Like, we had Equalizer, we had some big movies coming in. Mm-hmm. And that's what I love to do, man. I love to make movies.
Right.
I don't necessarily love to run a software company. And we're so proud of it. We couldn't have done it without it. But as far as being in both worlds, it wasn't a passion of mine. Sure. And at that point, we hadn't spun up enough clients yet where the machines were amortizing. So basically, the more clients we got, the more money we were losing. So it wasn't necessarily like we weren't really losing money, but it was like you were basically break even. Right. And with the amount of money we were putting into it, It was either let's go invest, let's either get an investor, let's either get debt and do like we had to do. There was a next phase to come,
Right.
And at that point, and which again, I just wasn't. I wanted to make movies. That's
Right.
really all I've wanted to do since I was 4, as I mentioned. So we had got offers from a couple other places, some software companies, and they weren't great offers. But Brian was like, let me go back to Google. Let me just let them know we have a deal that we were going to accept. We were going to be, exclusive in 24 hours. Like, let's just tell Google. Just tell them we're going to be exclusive for 24 hours. You guys want to, rethink this or consider it. And Google came back 6 hours later and said, we want it. What's the number? We told them the number. They said yes.
Okay.
We're like, oh, I guess we should have told them a bigger number because they said yes to the first number. But then they said it was going to take they're so buttoned up with mergers and acquisitions. It's ridiculous. Like,
Right.
they give you a timeline of exactly what's going to happen, when it's going to
They
happen.
have a PDF
It was a,
brochure ready for you.
seriously. I think we were company 28 of 32 companies that were bought by Google that year. So they
Right.
have a system. But they said it was going to take 3 months. It took 3 weeks, and we were out of Zync, and they had taken over all the IP
Right.
and our team and our patent and all the things. And
Yep.
I got to go focus on movies again, which was awesome.
Yeah. Well, I still worked with them for quite a while on the Zync project with Todd and all those guys. So
Yeah, and Todd and Brian are still there. Unfortunately, Zync is no longer, I believe, but
well, no, it's not. But it was still used for a long time.
I think it was just like 2020 or something. They decided to stop doing something.
Yeah. But I was working with, I don't know. I work with a couple of people at Google who are doing projects there themselves, and they're just like, no, we still use Zync all the time. I was like, oh, that's cool.
Oh, really? That's great to hear.
Well, I don't know recently. I don't know if they're doing that recently, but that was definitely being used. So it's cool.
I'm super proud of it. It's still an amazing piece of technology.
You guys
that made
were
it
the
just
first,
so easy to do it.
You guys were the first one to sort of like break that mold, right? I mean, obviously now there's a lot of different cloud services that have come up, and Deadline has got one, et cetera, et cetera. But if you guys hadn't done it, I don't think that would have worked as which is great. That's really cool.
Yeah, and if we hadn't done it too, Zero wouldn't have got where it is. I mean, when I sold Zero 4 years ago next month, and by the time I sold it, we had 100 employees in New York, Boston, and Los Angeles, never used debt.
Right.
All self-growth, no investors came in. I mean, and Zync is the only reason we were able to do that. So I'm still very proud of that and what they do. I still work with Zero every day. They're working on the last 3 movies I've done. They've worked on with me. So
okay, so what motivated you to? I mean, you said you love making movies, and what motivated you to sell Zero?
So honestly, it was my poor leadership, I think, really, more than anything else.
Okay.
I was really head of business development for feature films and the head creative at the company. And that's not a one-person job, especially when you have 100 people you're paying every 2 weeks. And it literally became, so I was in Budapest shooting a movie that we were shooting 7 days a week with Second Unit, because I was doing Second Unit as well, while I was posting another movie we just finished shooting, and I was prepping another movie I was about to start shooting.
Right.
And I missed my son's first Father's Day. My wife had it up to her neck with like the whole business. I was totally fried. And it was because of my lack of leadership. Like, I think a lot of, and I can prove it actually, and I'll tell you that story. So, I loved mentoring people. It wasn't that issue at all. I loved building a team. I loved that we got to build it in Boston, because we didn't have this pool of amazingly experienced decade-in people. We had some people like that for sure, because we had to, like people that had links to Boston wanted to come back. Either their spouse was from there or they were from there. We definitely got some senior people that were, the heavy hitters. But we had to do a lot of development of people, and that's one of my favorite things to do. So to get to see people even right out of college, and then, by the time I left Zero, I've been there 8 years, like people that are now running the company. I mean, it's incredible to see that growth and be a part of that. But where I was a poor leader was not trusting my people well enough. The one place I had a hard time transitioning was filmmaker relationships.
Okay.
There's such a nuance to talking to film directors, and they're all different. Like when I first met Pete Berg, it's a very different experience than when you first meet Catherine Bigelow, and how to build that rapport and how to kind of get their trust as quickly as you can. And you basically have 10 seconds to get their trust. And every filmmaker I've worked with is very unique and very different, and they're all trying to look for the BS in everyone they meet, especially department heads, especially a visual effects company that most of the stuff we got was, we were only in Boston until, I want to say 2015, I think we moved into LA. So when you're only in Boston, you're only on the South, they're like, what are you doing here if you're good? If you're good, what are you doing in Boston? It was kind of the thing we get a lot. And honestly, that's the first thing Antoine Fuqua said to me. Literally, not even nice to meet you. Your reel's good, what are you doing here? And that's, I think, a part of it, because if you are good, people would assume LA, which now, of course, is not really the case anymore, but at the time it was. So most of the filmmakers I met as Zero was growing, was the studio was forcing them to meet me, because they were usually shooting in Massachusetts or want to take advantage of the Massachusetts tax credit. So it wasn't like they heard of my name through multiple people and they wanted to meet me. The studio told them, go talk to them. You have to, because it's 25% discount on their work.
Right.
So they're already like, we don't know if we like you. Like, you have to win them over quickly. And with someone like Pete Berg, it's just fun inside baseball. Like, we had an hour's notice. We had no idea he was in town. The producer called us and said, hey, can you come meet Pete Berg right now to talk about his next movie? And literally an hour notice. We're like, okay. So we get there. We walk into a room with 14 people around a conference table at a hotel. It's one of the few rooms to this point, where I didn't know a single person. In the movie business, if there's a room full of 14 people, chances are good I'm going to know a couple. Right. You know, I didn't know anybody. I still don't even to this day. I think it was Jack Schuster at CBS Films who found us somehow and gave us. Anyway, I didn't know anyone. And the first thing Pete says to us, he shows us a handheld footage. It was for the film Patriots Day. He shows us handheld iPhone footage of the actual event of the bombing, and it's super shaky and total chaos. And wasn't even the guy focusing on it. It was a still photographer holding his still photographer in one hand, taking pictures, which he cared about, and then randomly holding his iPhone in the other. So it couldn't get shakier. It couldn't get more complex. There's nothing to track. Motion blurs everywhere. It's all smoke filled. Like, he goes, I want to put Mark Wahlberg in this shot. It's easy, right? And at that point, like, all the decisions that go in my head when he asks you that, like, it's a shit test. You know, he's testing you to see if you're going to say what you're going to say. And all the things that go through my head, how do I teach that to someone else? Because some directors want to hear you say, that's easy, or at least we can take care of it. You don't have to worry about it.
Right.
And then other directors like Pete, you need to kind of chest bump a little bit and go back at them and say, you're out of your mind. That's freaking ridiculously difficult. And we got to make Mark Wahlberg do all this crazy stuff. It's going to be super hard. So to know in the moment who you're talking to, how to read them and decide what to do. I remember in that moment, I waited so long to talk because Pete's coming over the table. He's saying this to me. My partner, Ryan Drews, is there with me. And I'm sitting looking at Pete like, you a-hole. Like, you're just trying to play with me right now. So I sat there silent, like, not going to let him own the conversation. I sat there in silence for probably 10 seconds, but it was long enough that Brian started talking, and I didn't want him to. And I slammed my hand on the table, and I stood up, and I said, Pete, that is ridiculous. You're a very talented filmmaker. You know this is not easy, and that's a bullshit question. Now, do you want to talk about how we can do it or not? And right then and there, we got hired. Like, I knew in that moment we got hired.
Right.
But how do you teach that to someone? That's not a visual.
Well, you got to take
thing,
a guts thing, right? Is he testing you? And he was, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And look, I could have been wrong, obviously.
Right.
But that one of the things I found, I had a gift for this, of looking at filmmakers, trying to understand the world from their point of view, empathize with what they need.
Right.
And in this case, make a read and go for it. And I couldn't figure out how to teach that. And I guess I took a lot of pride in that. So it's hard to do something I was still relatively new at. I mean, when I decided to sell Zero, I was really only in as a real feature film supervisor for 5 years. And over that time, I did 8 movies. Right. So it's not like you have a ton of cycles on this thing. And I didn't spend the time, although I had great creative supervisors on my team, I didn't spend the time to teach them how to talk to filmmakers. Right. And when I decided to part the company and we got into figuring out how we're going to sell it and all the things, I basically was there for 6 more months. Okay. And in that 6-month period, I trained people a lot more diligently on how to do this. Right. And guess what happened? Zero grew by 33% the year I left. Right. Because I finally got out of my own way, decided you can teach this stuff and you can sit down, you can slow down, which you can probably tell I have a hard time doing. Right. And figure out when you're in a room like that, what do you do? How do you get a filmmaker to trust you in those kind of situations? And and Zero's continuing to crush it. And Zero, Brian Drews led them through COVID, which not a lot of companies were able to do. So, right. It was an important step in my growth, and I'm really glad they did that. And I just wish I had done it earlier, because I'd probably still own Zero and not have sold it if I was able to delegate at that level. When I was. But
are you glad that you got out of your way in some ways?
I'm very glad I got out of my way.
Are you doing what you still love?
I am definitely still doing what I love, and I guess I don't regret selling Zero. I guess I regret that I just wish I would have made all of our lives easier by doing this 2 years earlier. Right. I still think I would have sold Zero when I did. I don't think that changes that much. Maybe it would have bought me another year, but I do feel like I wasted 2 years of personnel development, which slowed down other people, slowed down myself, put a lot of stress on me and my business partner. And I feel like that's the regret. Not that I sold it and left, but that I could have done it 2 years earlier and made all of our lives better, the work better, all the things. Right.
What were some of your favorite projects that you worked on when you were part of Zero?
The Equalizer was a super fun blast. Awesome. I mean, just to get to work with Denzel Washington and Antoine Fuqua. Antoine and I, we did 6 projects together. I mean, I did every movie with him after that.
Okay.
And that's, I guess, the biggest pride I take in Zero was that there wasn't a single filmmaker, except for David O. Russell, that didn't come back to us for every movie they did.
Okay.
So if you look at the Zero resume, it's like, yep, that's the same director on this one, the same film producer, so it was a real sense of pride going from a place that, hey, what are you doing in Boston, this small little company? But once you work with us one time, people never stopped.
Right.
Even when I left too, which is great. Like Pete Berg continues to do all his movies with Zero, and I haven't been there for 4 years.
Right.
So it's just a real point of pride that we were able to do that. But Equalizer started off for sure. I mean, it was at the time it's like we were punching above our weight class, but I guess I didn't feel it when it was happening. It's only after when people saw it and there's big explosions and CG Denzel faces and a huge diversity of work.
Right.
That at the time was like, let's just go. We did it. We had a great team. It was a small team, but we did it. And we just crushed it and it looked great. And I'm still very proud of it. And it was after full CG environments. And then, after, and some people in the industry that saw were like, how many people did you have do this? I'm like, there's 25 of us on the team. What? And they were the ones that were like, this is insane. You shouldn't have been able to do this.
Right.
So there's a lot of pride in that, but that's kind of how Zero felt like, well, look, if we can do that, we can keep going bigger and better. With a small team, we don't need this huge team because we can do it. And of course, that doesn't always work out, but for the most part, it did.
Yeah.
And we were able to, become filmmakers' friends and help them create their vision. But Equalizer was a big one for sure. There was a movie called Sex Tape, which I don't think many people saw, with Cameron Diaz and Jason Segel, which was so much fun. The director, oh my gosh, totally having Jake Kasdan, just the sweetest guy. That was just so much fun to work on. I've now been working on, I'm working on the 3rd movie now, or 4th movie with Sean Anders and John Morris. We did Daddy's Home 2 with them, Instant Family.
Right. And
now I'm doing a movie for them with Apple called Spirited, which is the best movie I've ever done, which is really exciting for everyone to see at Thanksgiving time. But yeah, so I guess those are the big ones that stand out the most. I mean, we ended up doing a lot of movies at Zero as the time has gone on. Patriots Day, certainly, again, I like working with big personalities like an Antoine and Pete Berg, and kind of like the challenges that kind of come from that.
Awesome. Okay, so after you sold it, so you kind of went independent VFX supervisor, right? So
yes,
or studio side is sometimes called, right?
Yes, yeah.
So what was that transition like?
So that part of it, so I had a 2-year non-compete agreement as part of my sales agreement with Zero. So basically for 2 years, I basically retired from movies.
Okay.
And started consulting and helping small businesses run their business better. And that was kind of what my job was for 2 years. It was like, I can't work in movies. What can I do? And I want to be with the family more. I mean, a big part of it was like, all right, let's get some family time in. I have 3 kids and, we want to recenter my life around what's most important. But I'm like, although I didn't necessarily have to work right away, I mean, the agreement was fair for all parties, but I can't just sit still. So like, well, what can I provide? Well, I started a company in my basement with $500. By the time I left, we had 3 different locations, 100 employees. I sold part of it to Google earlier. Like, there was a lot of business knowledge now in my brain that wasn't there previously. And I loved teaching people how to do things. It was artists before that, and it became small business owners for about 1.5 years, which was a great privilege. But at some point I was like, I gotta, honestly, at the point when I entered that, I was like, I could probably do this forever. This is my new thing. I'm going to give up movies because I have a better family life and all the things, but I can't do that. I love it. This is what I meant to do. I was created for this. I have to do this. And after 1.5 years, I started doing movies again and decided actually I was going to go into producing rather than visual effects, or at least kind of half and half as I went through it. So I got to produce a movie called American Underdog, which I also did the visual effects for, and with Zero actually, and Base in China and Fuse did that. So that was my first official studio side supervisor job, but I was also producing it. And honestly, because of how Zero did it, although I was a vendor side supervisor, there was no show supervisor. I was the show supervisor. So on Equalizer 1, we're the only vendor. I supervised the set. In many ways, I was the producer and the supervisor because I was the only representative of Zero on set. So I had to have the financial discussions with the producers as well as the creative discussions with Antoine. And that was a trial by fire. But once I got that, it's basically what I got used to. So for me, the way to transition into the studio side of things was that I don't have to worry about the money as much.
Sure.
And when you're the vendor executing it, and Antoine's like, hey, can we add another explosion shot? All I'm thinking is how much it's going to cost. Can we execute it? Do we have the personnel? Which is really nothing that's supposed to be in my brain when I'm supervising a movie. And ultimately for me, the movie was always more important to me than Zero's profitability, which again, not a great thing for a leader of business, but
Right.
that's just how I like the movie's the most important thing. I need to do this movie well. So it really didn't change my role. Like I don't feel like my role was any different on the studio side of things at all, except that I have more support because I have a bigger team around me. So like on Spirited, I have a visual effects producer, production manager, 2 coordinators, and a PA. And on the set, I had 2 wranglers and a witness cam operator. Okay. Like when I was doing it myself, because again, I'm the business owner, I'm trying to spend as little money as possible, I wasn't giving myself that level of support. So a lot of that was on me. Like I'm shooting my own HDRIs and I'm trying to run my own witness camera and not doing it as well as someone that would have been focused on it and things like that. So that's the biggest transition, honestly, for me was just like, hey, you don't have to do this all alone anymore. Right. You know, there's a team that you can put together that makes your life way easier and, by the way, makes you do better at your job. Right. Because now I get to focus on the creative and how to make the movie the best it can be.
And you don't make mistakes.
One of my favorite sayings is, if you're not making mistakes, you're not working hard enough.
Yeah.
So, especially in this business.
Yeah. That's true. Well, that's interesting. That's really cool. I mean, so you went into being studio side VFX supervisor right as the pandemic was kind of going on, right? Yeah. So I've spoken to a bunch of studios, you know, about how they transitioned during that time. But what was it like actually being on the filmmaking side of things during that time? Like, how did that work out?
Yeah, I mean, it was tense. It was really hard. You know, the safety was there, and I think there was so many unknowns with the safety, though, even then. Like, it was I finished shooting Spirited last November. That was way smoother process than the first movie we did. And actually, I helped my buddy, Matt Leslie, direct his first film, The Knocking. Well, I didn't help him direct it. He directed it. I helped him with some visual effects and stuff back in August of 2020. So, it was like one of the first films to start shooting in LA. And it was the first time on a movie set I didn't really have a lot of fun because of I realized what I love about filmmaking so much is the people you get to work with. But now we were like literally police, like 6 feet away, masks on. You can't have a conversation with someone on a movie set 6 feet away. Right. We're always whispering. There's no scenario where you're going to get to know someone 6 feet away.
And have a mask on and you can't hear it. You can't read lips. Nope.
So it was a hard shoot for him. It was a more, independent film, and it was just brutal. So it was like, man, this sucks. And then American Underdog was kind of the first Hollywood feature I was on a set for, and I got more used to it. It was a little bit more understood of what we were doing. The standards weren't changing every day, which I felt like we did when we did The Knocking. So at least we knew what we were getting into. For the most part, the crew was very cooperative with it, and it was a much more clear program. So although it still wasn't fun, I guess there was some things that were a little more lax, which I guess isn't a good thing in some people's mind, but like we were able to communicate a bit better. Right. So the 6 feet thing wasn't quite as policed. I mean, it was a football movie. So we're running around the football field. Right. Like it just wasn't as policed as like, no, literally 6 feet. Like they were measuring us. They had a 6 foot long stick that they would put between us on The Knocking.
Oh my God.
Or say, hey, look at that desk and that thing, that's 6 feet, stay that far apart. Like where on American Underdog, it wasn't quite at that level. Right. So it made it more collaborative again. So I had a lot more fun again, honestly. Right. And we kept safe, of course. And I don't think there was any real COVID outbreaks at all in that movie. So it worked out well. But it basically got into that rhythm. And then, of course, by Spirited, we all had the rhythm down. And, they were very good at it. The COVID teams at that point had done multiple movies, and it became easier.
I mean, it must have been a lot of expense added to films. Just obviously all the testing and new crew that had to be put into place, but also just slows the process down, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, especially on Underdog, because we had budgeted 30 days to shoot it, and we kept to 30 days. But honestly, we lost like 3 days of what I would consider actual time because of the testing and waiting for testing to come back, waiting for actors to come through and we had major issues with testing because we shot in Oklahoma City, and there wasn't, we had one lab that closed at a certain time. If we didn't get the test out in time, we didn't get the test back the next day. So we had significant issues we had massive crowds we were trying to get in, which we couldn't do crowds, of course, because of COVID, but we got approval for, I think, 180 people. And we got hit with the biggest snowstorm in Oklahoma's history, or close to it.
Wow.
Like the weekend before we started shooting these extras, we couldn't get them tested. Wow. So we went from getting 180 extras to fill up at least close to the field. And for the story, Kurt Warner played arena football. So you're basically playing on the size of an ice rink. Right. So I didn't want to do CG people next to the ice, basically, or next to the football field that's that small. Yeah. Putting them in big stands and filling up a whole stadium with 6,000 people, way easier than putting them next to the players, slamming into the walls. Right. So when we actually showed up the day to get we were expecting 180, we got 24 extras.
So did you just go tighter?
No, we couldn't, honestly, because it's a football movie. How do you avoid seeing everything?
Right.
So we did the best and we were shooting 6 cameras. Little remote control ones that would fly around the field, and big cranes, and steady cams, and handhelds, and it's just there was no way to do it. So basically, when I was producing it and supervising it, so it was like, okay, here's what we can do. Let's pick our main shot per take as much as we can and go, this is where we're going to use our crowd. Mm-hmm. Let's get them in the shot as much as we can. Let's see if we can get at least one of these takes to be clean of visual effects, if at all possible, or at least as minimal as we can. And then the rest are just going to, we'll do it digitally later. And then what I ended up doing was shooting about 250 people in different costumes on a green screen with a 9-camera array. So I just didn't see a scenario where we could do CG people as close as they are to the field in as many shots as we had. I mean, these would have had to been full photoreal, full body double, performances of people that have to be completely it's truly in focus next to the field. There was no scenario. So we shot a 9-camera array of people on green screen, and then we're able to populate them in 2D. Fuse effects did most of that work, and it worked out great, but it was scary because you're like, how are you going to, these are big 3D dynamic moves, and we're using 2D people. But it worked really well. It worked. It did work. It worked really well. But that was tense because, especially on the day, because you're like, all right, I'm ready to organize 180 people, and 24 show up, and you're just like, you know how empty a stadium looks with 24 people in it? It's like there's no one here.
Yeah. I remember.
So there was definitely some tensions.
I remember, it's funny. I remember my first experience with that was actually on iRobot when there was supposed to be a room with 1,000 robots, and we put 1,000 robots, and it didn't look even close to being 1,000.
I remember that. Yeah, seriously.
So we actually beat like 4,000 robots. It's like, yeah, that's what looks like 1,000 robots, but it's really 4,000.
Seriously, yeah. The wide shots especially, goodness gracious. And then we were shooting anamorphic too. Yeah. So the wide berth where you're like, oh, this is, 24 people look like 2. I mean, it was crazy.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's like a small family gathering.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, a big family came together. That's what it looked like, exactly.
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, well, listen, we're getting towards the end, but I still want to pick your brain about a couple of things if you have a second.
Yeah, please, go.
So what are some of your thoughts about the industry recently? Like where it's going? There's a bunch of new stuff happening. There's things in virtual productions, which is different from the LED walls or the in-camera visual effects, as it's called. And there's a real-time technology. There's a bunch of other things. What are your thoughts about where the general visual effects industry is going right now and how that's affecting things, and even just on set and all of that stuff?
Well, it's completely changing the way we're approaching every problem. I mean, the real-time production, the virtual productions, the what Unreal Engine can do, and the LED screens. I am so excited about where it's going. For me, although I love visual effects, just getting the story told the best way possible has always been my passion. And the visual effects is how we do it is just the tools. It's like, are you choosing a hammer or a drill? Like it doesn't matter. You just got to keep growing your bag of tricks. So for me, the more we can get in camera, it's better for everyone. It's better for the actors, for the directors, for the producers. A big thing now is I don't feel like I'm just supervising a movie for the final result. And which is kind of how I started my career. It's like, it doesn't matter what happens in post. It's just wait as long as you're done by the end. Right. But that's really not true anymore, especially for big Hollywood features. They test these movies for audiences. And you need to have this movie as polished as you can, as quickly as you can. The last movie I'm working on right now, we screened for an audience 6 weeks after we wrapped. And it's a massive, it's 1,600 shots. It's a massive movie. But we screened it for an audience within 6 weeks. And we could do that because I looked at it not as, let's just do what we have to do to make it look good for final, but while we're shooting it, going, okay, how do we get this thing previewable as fast as we can? So LED screens, LED walls, virtual production stuff is going to allow us to get audience feedback way faster. So it's not just about the final look, which I think also is enhanced in a lot of ways by this stuff. It's also allowing you to get feedback from an audience quicker and allow the post-process to be more efficient, which ultimately, in most cases, makes the movie a better movie. So that's where I'm most excited about this new technology. And obviously, as it's getting more and more affordable, the fun thing for me is it's we're a couple years away from independent filmmakers being able to do this too.
I'm all
not necessarily full CG environments, but driving plates and having intimate scenes where you just need something out the window, where you want to do an intimate scene of talking heads and you can't get to the location and there's a window out there. Yeah. And even independent film right now doing 55 visual effects, blue screens out the window, it's that's not going to get much cheaper because we still have an artist that has to do the work. Sure. But to rent a screen for a day and put the background you want out there is pretty darn cheap, even now, right? So it's going to start getting more affordable and allow people to do simpler things a lot quicker.
I like I like GarageBand technology. I mean, I think that's the cool stuff. I'm actually like right here in my living room. I'm testing some real-time ray tracing and virtual production stuff. So it's like,
awesome.
That's what I want to do, and that's the kind of stuff that I feel is important about that kind of stuff. So that's cool.
That's awesome.
I'm glad that that's happening. What are your thoughts about independent filmmakers now getting into these kind of things, and how streaming is affecting the work that those guys are able to do? Or what do you think about where the industry is going there?
Well, I'm really excited about the amount of content being created right now. Mm-hmm. Number one, I'm a fan of what we get to do, and that's both in film and television. I mean, I just love storytelling. I love being told a story and being taken away to a new world. And the amount of content, I can't imagine there's been a time in history where this much content's been made ever. I mean, it's just unbelievably prevalent with how much is being done, and that's not going to slow down anytime soon. And streaming services are, one of the biggest driving forces for that. So more and more people are getting a chance to have a career. Yeah. There's more jobs, which means there's more opportunity, and that's a big deal to me as someone who didn't. I got lucky because Jonathan Egstad, who went to my school randomly, who I didn't know, gave me a shot. Yep. And there's just a lot more opportunity for that now. So for me, the benefit of that is huge, for not just me, but for everyone. I mean, there's just so much stuff happening, and the quality of it is going up and up and up. People say, "Oh, there's nothing good on," and there's still complaints in general of like, "Well, it's like, are you kidding me? You know how much good stuff we have to watch right now, and even the stuff that's not good is still better." Yeah, exactly. But honestly, for the most part, we're making really, really good stuff. Yeah. And this stuff is really hard to do. And I'm not saying everything's great, but like for the most part, there's voices being heard now that would never have a chance to be heard. Yeah. And it's like, and it's not just a diversity perspective. Oh, we're making diversity a priority. That's not the reason this is happening. Right. They can say that all they want. It's because we're making so much more content. We need more voices. Yes. So while there's a lot of people saying, well, yeah, we're making an effort to make it more diverse, and yes, I'm sure they are. Brass taxes, if we weren't making more content, those voices still wouldn't have a place. Right. So we need the initiative of like, we need more people, we need more women filmmakers, we need more minority filmmakers, but they wouldn't be getting the shot. The studio wouldn't just start giving them $100 million movies because simply they want to be more diverse. We have more content being made. So the diversity of voices being told right now, I mean, it's amazing.
And you have the ability to go for niche audiences as opposed to the obligation of going for the mass audience.
Exactly. And the niche audiences, for me, the biggest thing about storytelling is the more specific you are with what you're trying to tell, the more broad your appeal can become. Because we're all relative. There's no great story told that only relates to one group of people. Right. Like it completely, the more, I can't remember, it's a quote some author said, but the more specific you get for your own story, the more it relates to everyone. Sure. So these opportunities are happening. I mean, I think it's the most exciting time in content creation ever, and I hate saying that word, but it feels like that's kind of the right word now because it is filmmaking.
Storytelling.
Yeah, storytelling. I mean, it's a super exciting time, and I'm just I feel very blessed that I was born at this time and get to be a part of it,
Awesome. Well, listen, Sean, I appreciate your time. This has been absolutely amazing. Great catching up with you. We definitely should do it more often. Maybe next time we don't do it without a mic, we can just do it over some beers.
Yes,
that'd be a lot of fun.
Sounds awesome, man. That'd be great.
It'd be a lot of fun. But thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, dude, great to see you again, brother.